Get out of here. My son yelled at it so loud when I tried to sit at the table. I spent hours decorating for him. I walked to the front door, and what I did next left every guest in complete shock. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe to her voice and tell me in the comments which part shocked you the most. Emily stood beside him, lips tight, eyes avoiding mine. She didn't say a word, but I could feel the satisfaction rolling off her in quiet waves. Ava Harper, the young event planner arranging flowers behind Emily, froze with a bundle of white roses in her hands. Even she didn't expect what Daniel just did. Mark and Sophia Reed were near the entryway, whispering to each other. They had watched me work all morning, watched me light every candle, fix every crooked fork, straighten every chair. I had wanted the evening to feel warm for everyone, even for Emily's parents who were arriving later. I guess warmth wasn't part of the plan on their side. When Daniel stepped closer, his face was red. I told you this dinner isn't for you to be at the table. Just stay in the kitchen. Please don't embarrass us. Embarrass them. My own son, the boy I held against my chest, the night his fever wouldn't break, the young man I stood by through every heartbreak and every job he lost, was embarrassed by me. My voice stayed soft. Daniel, I decorated this table for you. For tonight. I was invited, wasn't I? He hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Emily. She gave him the smallest nod. That was enough. He stood straighter, colder. Emily feels uncomfortable. Her parents expect a certain image. Just go, Mom. The room felt too bright, the candles suddenly too loud, their little flames dancing in the corners of my vision. Ava took a careful step toward me, whispering, Mrs. Hale, I'm so sorry. But even she didn't know the half of it. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why my chair was missing from the table I had set. I simply turned, knowing every pair of eyes followed me as I reached the front door. I felt Emily's quiet smirk. I felt Daniel's guilt hiding under his stubborn breath. I felt my heart tremble, but not break. Because what I did next, what I chose to do the moment I placed my hand on that doorknob, would leave every single guest in that room stunned into silence, and it would change everything. I hadn't expected the night to get any worse after Daniel's words, but as I lingered near the doorway, I overheard them. Daniel and Emily were speaking in low voices, but the words carried like knives. She ruins everything. Daniel whispered, I can't have her here embarrassing us again. Emily's laugh was soft, cruel. It's not just tonight. We need her out of the picture permanently, Daniel. My hands clenched around the doorknob. I wanted to step back, yell, demand an explanation, but instead I stood there quietly, listening. The room behind me was still frozen in tension. Ava Harper, adjusting a centerpiece of pale roses, glanced my way. Her eyes flickered with sympathy, almost begging me to leave before it got worse. Mrs. Hale, she whispered. I think you should sit this one out. She's been planning this for weeks. Planning. That word struck me harder than Daniel's shout. Emily had been planning while I baked, arranged flowers, and folded napkins. She had been plotting. My chest tightened. I realized this wasn't just about a dinner. This was about control, ownership, influence over my son, over my family, over everything I had quietly loved and protected for decades. I stepped back into the shadows near the hallway. Mark Reed's eyes met mine across the room. He gave me a subtle nod, a quiet acknowledgement that he had noticed it too. Sophia, standing beside him, shook her head almost imperceptibly. Margaret, she said softly, you've always been too kind, too patient. But tonight, I think they crossed a line. The murmurs of the guests didn't matter anymore. The candles flickered on the table I had set, each tiny flame reflecting the humiliation that had just passed. I realized that this room, filled with laughter and light just moments ago, was now a stage for Emily and Daniel's careful performance, and I was supposed to be the shadow in the corner. I breathed slowly, letting my mind clear. This wasn't about confrontation, not yet. I needed to understand, to watch, to see how far they were willing to go. Ava came closer, her voice barely audible. "Mrs. Hale, I've seen how she treats you. It's not the first time. Please, don't let her make you small." Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Even in that charged silence, I felt a quiet stirring of resolve. I would not let this humiliation define me. I would not step back and pretend it never happened. As Daniel and Emily whispered, plotting their control over my presence, I felt the first quiet spark of what I would need to reclaim, not with anger, not with shouting, but with the calm clarity of someone who had spent years knowing patience and planning. That night, as I left the room to collect my thoughts, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not let this be the last word. The next morning, I couldn't shake the memory of Daniel's voice, the sharpness in his words, or the way Emily's smirk lingered in my mind. I sat quietly at my kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea, trying to steady the tremor that had settled in my chest. Even after all these years, there were moments when motherhood felt like walking barefoot on broken glass, painful, unseen, and unavoidable. Sophia came by shortly after breakfast, her presence gentle but grounding. "Margaret," she said softly, sitting across from me, "you looked like you were carrying the weight of the world last night." What happened? I told her everything, each word careful, deliberate. I didn't want to waste her sympathy, only to have it with her in the chaos of that house. I told her about Daniel's shout, Emily's quiet cruelty, and the room's sudden, suffocating silence. Sophia's eyes filled with understanding, her hands squeezing mine across the table. "It's worse than I thought," she murmured. "This isn't just a temper outburst. It's been building. They've been shaping Daniel to see you as something less, something to erase." Her words hit harder than I expected. I had felt the shift in Daniel over the years, the distance, the avoidance, but hearing it named aloud crystallized it in a way that was almost painful. I looked down at my own hands, the hands that had baked, sewn, ironed, cleaned, and nurtured countless moments of family life. They were steady now, trembling only slightly, but those small shakes reminded me that these hands had never failed me before. They had guided a boy who once clung to my neck at night, and now they would guide me through this storm quietly, without anger, without theatrics. Ava Harper appeared at the doorway, her voice tentative. "Mrs. Hale," I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to say, "You're not imagining this. Emily has a way of controlling everything, making it seem normal. She's done it before, and not just with tonight." I nodded, taking in her words. The young woman had seen the family dynamics from the edge, yet her observations carried a clarity Daniel and Emily could never see in themselves. Mark Reed joined us shortly after, leaning against the doorway, his voice calm but sharp. "I saw the way Daniel looked at you last night. He wasn't angry, not really. He was confused and scared. Emily has him wrapped up in her image, her expectations. You're not the problem, Margaret." "They are." His words didn't give me relief. They gave me focus. As Sophia left with a quiet promise to return, I stayed at the table, staring at the sunlight spilling across the old oak surface. I remembered every scraped knee, every late-night whisper, every tear I had caught, every laughter I had nurtured. This was a test, not for me, but for them. They had chosen to show me the edge of their disrespect, but the truth was in my hands, and my hands had never faltered. And in that quiet kitchen, with tea cooling in my cup, and the hum of the street outside, I began to realize that I wasn't just going to survive this humiliation. I was beginning to see a path forward, a way to reclaim dignity and calm without raising my voice, without fury. A mother's hands know the truth, and it was time to let mine lead the way. The next day I found myself wandering through Daniel's study, ostensibly to retrieve a notebook I had left behind. The room smelled faintly of coffee and leather, a familiar scent I had once found comforting. But now it carried tension, a sense of secrets tucked between the shelves and drawers. My eyes caught a glimpse of papers, partially hidden under a stack of Emily's fashion magazines. Curiosity stirred, not the reckless kind, but a careful, deliberate awareness. I pulled them out quietly, my fingers brushing the edge of a contract that made my chest tighten. Daniel had been named the sole decision-maker for a piece of inherited property, a portion of land my late father had entrusted to me. My heart sank and then steadied. They hadn't just wanted to humiliate me at dinner. This had been the plan all along, to isolate me, to strip away what I had spent a lifetime protecting, and to make me feel powerless in my own family. Mark Reed had dropped by earlier that morning, casually glancing at the papers I was now holding. "I overheard Emily bragging to a friend," he said quietly, "about getting that property. She's been working behind the scenes for weeks." His calm voice contrasted sharply with the rising storm inside me. I hadn't seen it coming, not the full extent, but the pieces were falling into place now, one by one, like a puzzle I had ignored too long. I sank into the chair by the window, letting the sunlight fall on the papers in my lap. Daniel's name was on each sheet, but Emily's influence was unmistakable in the fine print and the way the clauses were worded. It wasn't just greed, it was control, manipulation, the quiet erasure of my presence. I could almost hear her whispering through the margins, commanding from the shadows, Sophia called later that afternoon. Her voice was gentle, but her concern was clear. "Margaret, you need to take care. They're not just being rude, they're strategizing. And it's bigger than one dinner." I listened, nodding even though she couldn't see me. Her words confirmed what I had feared, but instead of despair, I felt clarity. I thought about Daniel, the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and whispered secrets. Somewhere along the line, he had lost sight of the woman who loved him most. Emily's influence had quietly rewired his understanding of loyalty and respect. I knew I couldn't change him overnight, and I knew confronting them directly now would only play into Emily's hands. So I did the only thing a mother can do when faced with cunning, disguised as family. I began to observe. I watched, I listened, and I catalogued every movement, every word, every subtle manipulation. The quiet strength that had always lived in my hands, the same hands that had built homes, nurtured hearts, and carried secrets, was ready to guide me, and in that moment, seated by the window with the sunlight brushing my face, I understood that the real power wasn't in shouting, or in tears, or in confrontation. It was in patience, in clarity, and in knowing that what they wanted from me, control over my life, my property, my dignity, would not be theirs to take, not without a fight they could never see coming. 2 days later, the phone rang, slicing through the quiet hum of my apartment. Daniel's name flashed across the screen. My fingers hesitated before answering. I could feel the weight of the last few nights pressing down. The memory of his voice, the sharp edge of "get out," still lingering in my mind. "Mom, we're having another family gathering," he said, his tone careful, almost rehearsed. "Emily, she wants you there. They expect everyone." I paused, listening, sensing the tension layered under his words. You are expected," I asked, my voice calm but pointed. Daniel shifted, stumbling slightly over his words. "Yes, just, please. It's important you come." I put the phone down and let the quiet settle around me. Why now? After last week's humiliation, why was he inviting me again? I knew Emily's hand was in this somewhere, her signature smirk practically present over the line. And yet, a small part of me wondered, was this a trap or an opportunity? Ava Harper appeared later that afternoon, knocking lightly at my door. Mrs. Buchan by door, Mrs. Hale. I heard about the invitation, she said, stepping inside. Her young face held concern, but also a spark of excitement. You need to be careful. They've been planning these events, and I think this one is more than it seems. Something is going to happen tonight. Her words prickled at me, a reminder that I wasn't just stepping into a room for dinner. I was stepping into a carefully crafted scenario, designed to test me, to push me out, to make me feel powerless again, but I also felt the tiniest flicker of control. If they were planning, I could watch, I could learn, I could choose how to respond. Sophia stopped by shortly after Ava left, offering her gentle wisdom. Margaret, don't go in thinking about the trap. Go in watching. Let them underestimate you, but keep your mind clear. You've never needed anyone to defend you before, and you don't need them to now. Her words settled over me like a soft blanket. That evening, as I prepared to leave, I dressed simply but elegantly. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just myself. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, smoothing the folds of my blouse, brushing back my hair. This was my armor, subtle but complete. Each step toward Daniel's house felt like walking into a lion's den. Yet I felt steadier than I had in days. As I arrived, the lights were bright, music soft, the air scented with the flowers I had noticed Ava arranging earlier. Guests were milling about, their laughter polite but cautious. Emily spotted me immediately, her smile tight, practiced. Daniel stood beside her, shifting uncomfortably. I could feel the tension humming between them, like a wire pulled taut. And in that moment I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about a dinner, it was a stage, a test, and I was finally ready to step into it, not as the humiliated mother, but as someone who had begun to see every move before it happened. I took a deep breath, smiled softly, and walked in. The moment I stepped into the room, I felt it. An absence, a space deliberately left empty, a place where my seat should have been, right at the head of the table. My eyes followed the curve of the polished wood, tracing the empty chair like a wound. Guests murmured politely, unsure where I would sit, shifting uneasily in their spots. Emily's lips curved in a practiced smile, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. I didn't show the ache that ran through me. Instead, I let my gaze wander across the carefully set table, the gleaming plates, the folded napkins, the crystal glasses sparkling in the soft chandelier light. This was all meant to impress, to distract, to assert control. And yet, it only made the absence more glaring, more telling. "Emily, it seems there's a mistake," I said softly, voice calm, deliberate. My hands rested lightly on the back of a chair, steady and unshaken. My seat, where is it? Oh, that, Emily replied quickly, a little too quickly. It must have been an oversight. We'll fix it. You can sit anywhere. Her voice carried the faint tremor of uncertainty she never let anyone see. I nodded, moving slowly, letting every step carry the weight of quiet confidence. Guests exchanged glances, sensing the tension but unsure what to do. Pastor Collins, standing near the fireplace, gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging that he had noticed Emily's manipulation. Ava, standing by the floral arrangements, whispered, "I'm so sorry. She did this on purpose." Mark Reed, ever observant, leaned slightly toward me and murmured, "They underestimate you." That's their mistake. I allowed a small, reflective smile, though my heart still ached with the sting of exclusion. Every year, every sacrifice, every quiet effort to nurture this family had brought me here, now faced with deliberate erasure. I chose my seat calmly, a few places down, letting the empty chair stand as a silent testament. The murmurs of guests faded behind the soft clinking of cutlery and the muted hum of polite conversation. Daniel avoided my gaze, caught between the words he had spoken the night of the first dinner and the pull of guilt he could no longer hide. His lips pressed into a thin line, but he remained silent. As the evening unfolded, Emily tried subtly to maintain her image of control. But every glance she cast toward me carried tension. Every small comment, carefully polite, was edged with unease. Ava watched quietly, taking in the details, while Pastor Collins and Mark Reed observed from the edges, silently recording the truths that Emily tried to conceal. And in that moment, seated at my own place, observing the careful chaos, I realized something important. Power wasn't in yelling and forcing others to see you, or in overt control. Power could be quiet, patient, and observant. It was in knowing the truth, watching the moves, and letting them reveal themselves, not through confrontation, but through their own missteps. The empty seat was no longer just absence, it was a mirror. And I was ready to reflect back everything they thought they could hide. Later that evening, after the polite chaos of dinner had settled into subdued conversation, I quietly excused myself. The soft murmur of voices followed me as I moved toward the study, my steps deliberate, my heart calm but alert. Something had been nagging at me since I first saw the empty seat. The way Emily had orchestrated everything, the way Daniel had hesitated, the subtle panic behind his practiced calm. I needed to know the depth of their plan. Inside the study, I found the desk cluttered with papers, envelopes, and pens, as if no one had cared to organize them. But I noticed one envelope, partially tucked under a folder marked with Daniel's handwriting. My fingers hovered over it. It was small, unassuming, exactly the kind of thing they would expect me to overlook. Carefully, I pulled it free, unfolding the documents inside. It was a contract, legal in its language and precise in its wording. Daniel's name appeared as the executor of a certain property I had left in trust, but Emily's subtle influence was unmistakable. She had rewritten clauses, inserted conditions, and ensured that if Daniel followed blindly, I would have no control over something that had belonged to my family for generations. I sank into the chair, letting the papers rest in my lap, reading every word, feeling the quiet weight of their intent. This wasn't merely a family dinner or a power play at the table. This was calculated weeks of planning, hidden agendas, manipulation masked as politeness. Every line was a reminder that they wanted to erase my presence, diminish my influence, and take control of something I had guarded all my life. Ava Harper's soft voice startled me from the doorway. "Mrs. Brood, Mrs. One of Cree." "Hail, you found it," she whispered, eyes wide with concern. "I've seen Emily do this before. She manipulates Daniel subtly, and he doesn't even realize it. But you can fix this. You can stop it." I nodded slowly, feeling a mix of anger and clarity. Anger at the audacity. Yes, but also a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the evidence was in my hands now. It wasn't just words anymore, it was proof, and proof meant that this wasn't something I had to fight blindly. Mark Reed appeared behind Ava, leaning against the doorway. "They underestimate you," he said, calm and measured. "They think you don't see the pieces, but you do. You always do." His words wrapped around me like a shield. I realized that observation, patience, and subtle strategy were far more powerful than confrontation. I left the study with the contract carefully tucked under my arm, moving as if I were simply walking through the house. Every step was measured, calm, almost ceremonial. I felt the quiet stirrings of what would come next, a plan not of anger, but of measured poetic reclamation. As I rejoined the dining room, the laughter and polite chatter continued. Oblivious to the quiet storm that had begun, I carried the truth with me, and in that, I found the first true sense of empowerment I had felt since Daniel's harsh words. because now I knew exactly what they wanted, and I was ready to make sure they wouldn't get it. The days following the dinner passed in a quiet haze of observation. I watched, I listened, and I measured every action in that house, as if it were a carefully orchestrated dance, and for once, I wasn't dancing to someone else's tune. Daniel moved through the rooms like a ghost, polite but uncertain, carrying Emily's subtle commands in his every glance and hesitation. Every detail mattered. The way he opened doors, the careful way he poured wine, the way he avoided my eyes. I began leaving small notes where only I could see them. Not confrontational, not accusatory, simply reminders to myself, little markers of what I had observed, what I had discovered. Emily's patterns were meticulous. She liked to control every gathering, every conversation, every impression Daniel's family received. I noted every favor she expected, every obligation she tried to manufacture. One afternoon, Ava Harper stopped by again, holding a tray of tea. "Mrs. Hale," she said quietly, setting it down, "I can't believe how calm you've been. I thought anyone would have lost their mind by now. But you're not just calm. You're thinking." Her eyes glimmered with admiration. "You're planning." I smiled faintly, sipping my tea slowly, savoring the warmth. "Planning isn't the same as scheming," I said softly. "It's simply seeing clearly, understanding where the weaknesses lie, and knowing what they think they've hidden." Mark Reed had been helpful as ever, visiting occasionally under the guise of casual conversation. "Every move they make," he murmured, "one evening is loud if you're listening carefully. They assume you won't notice the small things. But you do. And that's where the advantage lies." It became a quiet game of observation. Emily tried to assert her dominance in subtle ways, choosing where guests should sit, deciding the flow of conversation, slipping in small hints to undermine my authority. I responded not with confrontation, but with gentle pauses, subtle positioning, and the appearance of calm indifference. Every action of hers was catalogued, every word noted, every glance weighed. The turning point came one evening when Daniel asked me to help with a minor detail, a table arrangement for an upcoming event. He handed me the papers without realizing I had already read the contract, and I looked at him, calm and steady, and said, "I'll take care of it." There was something in my tone, a quiet authority, that caught him off guard. For a moment, the influence of Emily's control wavered. I realized then that my first true move didn't have to be dramatic. It didn't need to be loud. It simply had to be present, deliberate, and undeniable. Every small action would ripple forward, quietly asserting what had always been mine: dignity, patience, and clarity. And so I began, piece by piece, subtle but unshakable, weaving the beginnings of a plan they would never see coming. A plan that didn't need fury. Only truth and the quiet strength of a mother who knew she could not be erased. Over the following week, the house began to feel different, though no one else noticed. I moved quietly among the rooms, carrying my presence like a shadow that couldn't be ignored. Each action I took was deliberate. A rearranged centerpiece here, a carefully chosen word there, a gentle smile offered at the right moment. Guests and family alike assumed I was simply being polite, unaware that every small gesture was a thread weaving a larger pattern. Daniel remained distracted, pulled between Emily's carefully curated expectations and the quiet authority I radiated without effort. He opened doors for me, hesitated over which glass to pour, watched me with a mixture of confusion and reluctant respect. Emily, for her part, tried to tighten her control, but her carefully practiced smile faltered more often than she realized. I could see the cracks forming in her careful composure. Ava Harper, ever observant, whispered one afternoon as we arranged flowers in the living room. Mrs. Fires in the living room. "Hale, you don't even have to speak. Everything you do, It's like they're being watched without realizing it. I only nodded, letting her words sink in. Indeed, the smallest actions mattered. A napkin folded slightly differently, a note left in plain sight, a gentle correction here or there, subtle, almost invisible, yet immensely effective. Mark Reed visited one evening, settling into a chair across from me, with quiet ease. "They think they're in control," he murmured, voice low, "but control isn't about loudness or aggression. It's about patience, timing, and observation. And you have all three." I felt a small thrill, a quiet satisfaction. My plan was no longer just about protecting what was mine. It was about proving, calmly and poetically, that manipulation would never outsmart dignity. Even Daniel began to shift. He would glance toward me before responding to Emily's suggestions, almost imperceptibly, as if searching for guidance. The tension between mother and son had softened, replaced with a delicate hesitation. Emily noticed it too, though she refused to acknowledge it openly. Her eyes betrayed her, a flicker of panic hiding behind practiced control. I walked through the rooms with ease, moving items here and there, arranging furniture and flowers, and leaving subtle reminders of my presence. Every gesture, every small decision, carried weight. Guests were unaware, but the family's dynamics were changing under their very noses. The table, the chairs, the lighting, even the positioning of the silverware, they all told a quiet story. A story of observation, of patience, and of a mother reclaiming her ground without raising her voice. And in these small, deliberate movements, I began to feel the first real sense of empowerment since that night Daniel yelled at me. The quiet tension in the room was no longer suffocating. It was charged with possibility. Possibility that the control they had tried to wield over me would slip through their fingers, gently, inevitably, and with poetic justice. The shift was subtle, almost invisible, but I felt it in my bones. And that, I realized, was often the most powerful kind of change. It happened one evening during a small family gathering, a casual tea that Emily had orchestrated, confident that she controlled every detail. I arrived, calm and collected, carrying nothing but my presence. The guests, polite but unsuspecting, mingled quietly, unaware that subtle shifts were already taking place beneath the surface. Emily began directing the conversation, subtly asserting her dominance as she always did. She placed Daniel beside her, guiding his words, steering the laughter, controlling the room like a conductor. But for the first time, her choreography faltered. I noticed the small missteps. Daniel hesitated before answering, his eyes flicking toward me ever so slightly, almost unconsciously. A shadow of doubt had crept in, and Emily sensed it immediately. Ava Harper, ever perceptive, whispered as she passed me a cup of tea, "Did you see that? He's listening to you now, not her." I gave a faint, knowing smile, feeling the quiet thrill of recognition. This was the first small sign that my patience and observation were paying off. The subtle psychological shift I had been cultivating for weeks was beginning to show. Mark Reed, standing near the fireplace with a calm expression, leaned toward me and murmured, "Notice how she's trying to regain control. But it's too late. The balance has shifted, and she knows it." I nodded silently. The power in a quiet victory is often invisible to the untrained eye, yet it resonates deeply in those who sense it. Emily tried to redirect attention with a sharp laugh, commenting on the flower arrangement I had subtly altered earlier in the day. She expected admiration, praise, acknowledgement, but the guests, unconsciously influenced by the subtle cues I had placed, noticed the imperfections she had inserted, the tiny miscalculations she had overlooked. Her carefully curated image cracked in a way that was almost imperceptible, but undeniable to those watching closely. Daniel's eyes met mine across the table for a brief moment, his expression unreadable, yet something unspoken passed between us. He was seeing clearly for the first time in months, or maybe even years. He didn't speak, didn't act, but I felt the weight of awareness shift, even slightly. and in that stillness, I recognized the profound power of subtle, deliberate action. By the end of the evening, Emily's smile had tightened, a flicker of panic hidden behind forced grace. The control she had taken for granted was loosening, quietly, without confrontation, without anger, without the need for dramatic gestures. The seeds I had planted, the observations, the small adjustments, the quiet authority were beginning to bear fruit. As I walked back to my apartment that night, the quiet streets of Salem reflected in the amber glow of streetlights, I realized that revenge need not be loud to be complete. It could be slow, patient, poetic. It could unfold with dignity, leaving those who underestimated me stunned in silence. And for the first time since Daniel's shout that night, I felt the calm certainty that the narrative was shifting and that I was quietly, steadily reclaiming my place. A week after that small tea gathering, I noticed it, the hesitation in Daniel's movements, the subtle pauses before he responded to Emily, the way his eyes searched mine almost unconsciously. He no longer acted solely under her influence. The boy who once clung to me in the night had grown into a man still caught in her web, but now he was beginning to question the strings he had blindly followed. I saw it first at dinner. Emily had spent the afternoon orchestrating every detail, confident that her control was absolute. She placed the silverware, adjusted the chairs, even nudged the wine glasses just so. And yet, when Daniel reached for the water pitcher, his hand trembled slightly. Almost imperceptibly, his eyes found mine across the table, and in that moment I recognized something profound: doubt. Ava Harper, quietly arranging flowers in the corner, whispered to me, "They don't even notice, but he's listening to you. He's thinking." And that hesitation, it's terrifying her. I allowed a faint reflective smile. The quiet victories, subtle and unassuming, were having their effect. Emily's control was slipping, and Daniel's awareness was growing. Mark Reed visited later that evening, speaking softly as we watched the family disperse into the living room. "You've done something remarkable," he murmured. "You didn't confront, you didn't shout, but you've shifted the dynamics. They can't see it, yet they feel it." That doubt in Daniel, it's everything. And indeed, the change was undeniable. Daniel's tone when speaking to Emily was softer, less rehearsed. He paused, sometimes questioning her suggestions before complying. That small flicker of independence, almost invisible, was a quiet rebellion. Emily noticed it too, though she tried to mask her frustration behind polite smiles and controlled laughter. Her tight grip on the family's perception was loosening, strand by strand, thread by thread. I realized then that the true power of my approach wasn't in confrontation or anger. It was in presence, in subtle influence, in letting them underestimate me while I quietly guided the truth into view. The patience, the careful observation, the deliberate positioning of myself in each scenario, it had all led to this moment. Later, as the house settled into quiet night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, reflecting on the subtle shifts. The tension had not disappeared, but it had begun to bend in my favor. And the knowledge that Daniel was beginning to see the truth, and that Emily could feel her control slipping, brought a quiet satisfaction I had not expected. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was patient, deliberate, and deeply human. And I knew, without a doubt, that the moment of poetic reclamation, the moment they would fully understand that I had never been powerless, was approaching slowly, inevitably, and with grace. It was during a weekend brunch that the first real cracks in Emily's carefully constructed world became visible. She had spent hours perfecting every detail, from the flowers on the table to the placement of the napkins, convinced that she controlled the narrative. But she didn't notice the subtle adjustments I had made, small, deliberate cues that spoke louder than any words. A folded napkin here, a chair slightly repositioned there, the soft way I placed my hand on the table. Daniel's attention was no longer entirely on her. He lingered on my gestures, observed my calm movements, and hesitated before responding to Emily's prompts. I noticed his brow furrow, a small, almost imperceptible sign of the internal struggle that had begun to stir within him. For years he had followed her guidance unquestioningly, but now, with every interaction, the weight of my quiet presence pressed gently, but undeniably on his conscience. Ava Harper, hovering nearby as she cleared a tray, whispered softly, "Mrs. Hale, look at them. She's trying to dominate, but it's like her control is unraveling." I didn't need to respond. The scene before me was confirmation enough. Emily's carefully rehearsed confidence had begun to fracture. Her eyes darted to Daniel repeatedly, her smile tight, a subtle tremor betraying the anxiety she could not fully hide. Mark Reed arrived later, joining us with a quiet, knowing look. "She's lost control," he said softly, glancing toward Emily, "and Daniel is waking up to it. You've orchestrated this beautifully." I allowed a faint, reflective smile. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about reclaiming the respect, dignity, and agency that had been denied me for so long. The poetic justice was in the subtlety, in the patience, in letting them unravel themselves. Even the other guests sensed the tension, though they couldn't articulate it. Their polite chatter faltered slightly when Emily's tight composure broke for a second, revealing the unease she had worked so hard to conceal. It was a delicate shift, invisible to most, but it resonated deeply with me. I had never needed to raise my voice. I had never needed to confront aggressively. Every gesture, every quiet observation had been enough to shift the balance. As the brunch ended, Daniel lingered longer than usual near my side. His eyes held questions, uncertainty, and a hint of remorse. Emily, meanwhile, tried to salvage her composure, but the cracks were undeniable. Her carefully curated power had begun to crumble under the weight of truth and quiet authority. That evening, as I sat alone with a cup of tea, I reflected on the subtle progression of my plan. Revenge, I realized, was not about spectacle. It was about precision, patience, and clarity. It was about letting those who underestimated you gradually understand a strength they could never take from you. And now, finally, I could feel the moment approaching, the moment when the quiet, deliberate reclaiming of dignity would reach its culmination. By the time the weekend ended, the atmosphere in Daniel's house had shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Emily's confidence, once so commanding, now wavered under the weight of small, deliberate observations I had planted. Every glance she cast my way was tinged with unease. She tried to maintain control, directing conversations, insisting on arrangements, but her smile faltered, her words stumbled. I watched quietly, calmly, aware of each imperfection in her facade. Daniel, too, was changing. His voice held a new hesitation, a softness that had never been there before. He was thinking, questioning, and unconsciously weighing every word against my steady presence. I noticed how he paused before agreeing with Emily, how he looked at me for a subtle cue. For the first time he was seeing clearly, not through the filter she had imposed, but through the clarity I had fostered. Ava Harper came to me that evening, arranging flowers in the corner with a quiet smile. "They're both realizing it now," she said softly. "It's subtle, but they feel the shift. They don't know how to respond." I nodded, savoring the quiet tension. This wasn't about confrontation. This was about allowing the truth to breathe and move in its own time, letting the fractures appear without forcing them. Mark Reed visited later, taking a seat beside me with his usual calm observation. "The moment is near," he murmured. "You've orchestrated this with patience. The smallest gestures, the quiet presence, they're unraveling before anyone can stop it. Emily doesn't even realize how much control she's lost. And Daniel, he's starting to understand his own missteps." I reflected on all the subtle shifts, The empty seat that spoke volumes, the slight hesitation in Daniel's movements, the cracks forming in Emily's smile, the understated authority I had claimed simply by being present. It was almost poetic revenge without malice. Without malice, justice without aggression. The story of control and misjudgment was unfolding quietly, like a flower opening in the dark. As the evening grew later, I moved through the house with soft steps, observing each detail, each reaction. Emily tried one last subtle maneuver, attempting to redirect a conversation, to reclaim dominance, but the effort was clumsy and transparent. The guests sensed it, though they couldn't articulate why. The balance had shifted, and it was only a matter of time before the culmination became undeniable. In that moment, seated in quiet reflection, I realized how powerful patience and subtlety could be. The poetic revenge I had envisioned was not about confrontation. It was about clarity, dignity, and allowing the truth to assert itself naturally. I could feel the end of this silent struggle approaching, and the calm certainty in my chest was a comfort I had not known in years. This was the final stretch, the calm before the reveal, the quiet before the undeniable acknowledgement of what had always been mine. The threads I had laid with care were ready to be pulled, and the story was about to reach its most satisfying chapter. The evening of the final dinner arrived, and the house was filled with the polite hum of conversation and the soft clinking of silverware. Emily had orchestrated every detail, as she always did, convinced that she still held control. But I entered with a calm that no one could challenge. Every step was measured, deliberate, and quietly commanding. The air seemed different, lighter, charged with anticipation that only I could feel fully. I took my place at the table, not the empty seat they had tried to erase, but the one I had chosen with quiet intention. The guests, sensing the subtle tension, looked on, curious and uneasy. Daniel's eyes met mine across the table, and for the first time I saw clarity there, a mixture of respect, understanding, and an unspoken apology. Emily's eyes flicked toward me, repeatedly, her confident mask slipping, revealing the worry she could no longer hide. Throughout the dinner, I spoke with gentle authority, guiding conversations, offering observations that felt natural yet carried undeniable weight. Every subtle adjustment I had made in previous weeks now came together like a symphony, tiny gestures, small placements, patient observation, each reinforcing my presence and reclaiming what they had tried to take from me. At one point, Emily tried to assert herself, redirecting the discussion toward a family matter she had carefully manipulated in the past, but Daniel paused before responding, looking at me instead. In that instant, the quiet power I had cultivated revealed itself fully. The moment was small, understated, yet devastatingly effective. Emily's control, shattered, not with words, not with anger, but with truth. And the truth was clear. I had never been powerless. Ava Harper and Mark Reed, standing at a discreet distance, exchanged satisfied glances. They had witnessed the subtle unraveling, the poetic justice unfolding before everyone, and now it was complete. The balance had shifted, quietly and undeniably. Daniel, fully aware for the first time, offered a tentative smile, and I returned it with the calm warmth of a mother who had reclaimed her place, her dignity, and her voice. After the guests departed, the house fell into a serene silence. I walked through each room slowly, noticing the spaces I had quietly transformed, the absence of tension, and the sense of justice that hung gently in the air. It was not loud or dramatic. There had been no confrontation, no raised voices, only observation, patience, and the quiet assertion of truth. The poetic revenge I had envisioned was complete, and it was beautiful in its simplicity and grace. Sitting by the window with a cup of tea, I reflected on what had unfolded. Life had a way of testing patience, endurance, and dignity, but it also had a way of rewarding calm, careful strength. I had learned that the quietest actions could leave the deepest impact, that subtlety often outshines aggression, and that true power lies in presence and clarity. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Maybe your voice will be next on Her Voice.